Hi, how you doing? I rely a lot on lilies for summer color, and right now my absolute favorites are stealing the show, Martagon lilies. Some of these graceful nodding beauties are here behind me, and today we're doing a deep dive into everything Martagon, how to grow them, how to start them from seed, and why they're a great lily for cold climate gardeners. My name is Sharon, and I garden on a large yard in a small town in east central Saskatchewan, Zone 3. Welcome to my Sask Garden. So before we get into Martagons specifically, let's clear up one thing. True lilies are in the Lilium genus, and they are all bulbs with overlapping scales. Each bulb produces a single stem, and clumps of lilies with multiple stems will have multiple bulbs underneath there. That stem actually comes from the very center of the bulb. So you don't have one bulb with multiple stems. And I wanted to make that distinction about the genus Lilium being bulbs so that there is no confusion about daylilies, which are roots, not bulbs. Daylilies are not in the Lilium family, and they are actually hemerocallis. Now, there are 9 official divisions of the lilies, but for cold climate gardeners, the ones you are most often going to see are Martagons, Asiatics. They're the easy ones, the ones you most often see. The Orientals, they are the most fragrant. They need a little extra consideration here in Zone 3. Trumpets, they're tall and fragrant. They need really sharp drainage. And the hybrids, which are usually seen as LA hybrid or OT hybrid, and that is Longiflorum Asiatic cross or an Oriental trumpet cross. And those hybrids are bred for hardiness and for size. I grow quite a few of the different types of lilies, but today I'm going to talk about Division 2 Martagon lilies because they're blooming right now, and what better time to talk about them. In my yard here in east central Saskatchewan, they are fairly reliable, coming into bloom always around Canada Day and always preceding the Asiatic lilies. Martagon lily foliage is different than all other lilies. They have these whorled leaves where most other types of lilies have this kind of stem. And here's a big distinction. Martagons grow very well in part shade conditions where most others, if not all, do far better in full sun. That being said, I also have Martagons growing in full sun here by the rock garden with no problem at all. But most of these growing in sun do grow with lamium at their bases, and the rest have a mulch or some other type of shade protecting their bases. Martagons, in my experience, do like a really mulchy soil, lots of humus, leaves, lots of organic matter, and to have their bases shaded. They seem to really like my kind of woodland setting here in the backyard and are naturalizing beautifully. In the spring, Martagons pop out of the soil really early, earlier than other lilies. Because they are so early, they are also a little susceptible to frost. The foliage is okay, and I've never had that damaged. But if the flower buds are starting to form and frost hits, the buds will be killed. That happened to me a few years ago, and I did not have one Martagon lily bloom that year. It did no permanent damage of any kind, and they have bloomed normally every year since. They have what are called Turk's cap flowers that face down, and the petals curve back, or called recurved. Now, there are other types of lilies that are also described as Turk's cap, so the flower shape itself is not indicative of a Martagon. Martagons can have a couple of dozen small buds up their long stem, and the blooms open from the bottom to the top. I always think that the Martagons are sort of the graceful, elegant members of the lily family. Their beauty is more understated and not in your face flashy like some of the Asiatics are. My Martagons are all seed grown, and they were a pink and white mix to start. I started the first seeds in 2006, and my first Martagon blooms appeared in 2010, but they were, small, and subsequent years were, of course, better as the bulb grew. Once they started blooming, I let them set seed. When the seed pods were dry and cracked open, I either saved the seed or, more often, I shake them all over the yard just to disperse them. And now they germinate on their own every year. I have new seedlings coming up constantly, and every year some reach blooming for the first time. These Martagons are, of course, all cross-pollinated. Probably 75% of my lilies are some color of pink, some more speckled than others. The other 25% are all white and they are not speckled. I check each flowering stem every year to see if I've gotten any interesting crosses, you know, like polka dots or something. I have yet to divide a clump of Martagons, although I do have this rather large clump of white ones that is getting pretty big around. It now has 12 stems, which means that there are 12 bulbs under there that need to be split. I also noticed this year that the stems are not as tall, nor are there as many buds as previous years. So probably about the end of August, which will be about 8 weeks after bloom, I'll be digging these up to divide and plant elsewhere. And I'm going to add them to a sunnier area in the backyard, which is the only bed that I don't have any Martagons at all. Martagon lily bulbs, particularly hybrid named varieties, are fairly expensive, and so it's nice to be able to have a kind of cheaper alternative, even though it does take a bit more time to get the end result. Martagon lily seeds, once sown, need a few months of very warm temperatures, followed by about 3 months of cold and then warm again. Martagon lilies utilize a process called delayed hypogeal germination. This means that the seeds do not produce top growth immediately. After or during a warm period, a little baby bulblet forms, and then after 3 months of cold, that little bulb sends up one leaf, and that's all you get the first year. The next year, or in the second year, the growth will be a little bit bigger. It'll have a stem and maybe 3 or 4 leaves, and it continues that way each year, getting a little bigger every year until it's finally old enough to bloom. The stem will continue to get bigger, and the blooms will become more plentiful as the bulb ages, and eventually each bulb will begin to increase into more bulbs. Now, all of these in my yard have been germinating, growing, and getting to full size quite naturally for the last about 15 years, just through the seasons, all on their own. But starting them from seed can, of course, be achieved in a more controlled environment, as I did when I started my very first seeds. Seed is generally sown in dryish peat moss and kept in a jar or a clear plastic container. And that is kept in a warm environment initially, say around room temperature or a little warmer, like I said, for about 3 months. You don't really want to, shake them up or anything like that. Just make sure you can see a few seeds through the container. That's why you'd use a clear one. And you want to see it because you'll see that little bulblets have formed. And then once that happens, like I said, around the 3-month mark, then that container goes into the fridge or somewhere pretty cold. After that, the contents of the jar can be dumped onto a pot of soil and covered with a bit more soil. Those little bulbs send up one leaf. There is also an easier way. One year in the fall, I scattered a bunch of seed over a large container of soil and I covered them with perlite. Then I tied down some shade cloth over that container and I set it in the shade, leaving it there outside over the winter. In the spring, I had a bunch of little leaves, all on its own without much effort from me. That fall, I rather unceremoniously dumped that container full of baby leaves into the garden. I'm sure I had some losses, but this area right here is pretty much the result of that. And that gets me to the point that you don't need to worry about depth. Lilies, including Martagons, know how to take care of themselves without any human intervention. And that's because all lilies have the ability to pull themselves down to the correct depth to grow. They have what are called contractile roots. There is an even faster way, and that is by reproducing the scales. What happens is you sacrifice a bulb and you basically destroy it, or at least some of it. You plant all those scales exactly the same as you would seed, with the warm followed by the cold treatment. After that cold period, those scales will send up not just a leaf, but a small stem with leaves and produce into a small bulb. Then those bulbs can be potted up or planted out. The best time to start seeds or scales indoors, as I did, would probably be October. 3 months of warm followed by 3 months of cold would find those seeds sending up a leaf indoors, maybe around April, May. And if you were doing it outdoors, I'd start a little earlier and you'd probably see the foliage just a little later. As I said, I have done this and then I basically dumped the container outside where I wanted them to grow, covered with a bit more soil, and pretty much just walked away and let them do their own thing. But for more control, or if I had, say, really expensive seed that I was more concerned about, each of those little bulbets with the one leaf could be potted separately, set in the shade, and taken care of and babied through the season before winter came along again. Aside from dividing clumps, like I mentioned, there is no other care Martagon lilies require. I let some set seed, or some years I don't let them, and I cut off the stems after bloom. I cut the stem just above the first set of leaves. The foliage generally remains very nice right through till frost, and the foliage must remain to feed and nourish the bulb for next season's growth. Now, they are a member of the lily family, so they could be hit by the scarlet lily beetle. I am lucky enough to have not ever had a beetle in this yard, and you know what? I even hate to say that for fear of jinxing myself. I am quite vigilant, and I do check all the lilies frequently for signs. And so, since I've never battled them, I can't say if something works or not. I've seen a ton of literature and gardeners' experiences with them. There are all kinds of controls for lily beetle mentioned, and their effectiveness is quite varied. I think it'll depend a lot on persistence in whatever method of control you use. Everything from picking and squishing, diatomaceous earth, neem oil, right through to chemical control. In my opinion, if I get them in my yard, I'm hitting them hard with probably everything I can find. But aside from hand picking into soapy water, it sounds like spraying the larvae with neem oil at dusk is quite effective if chemical control isn't an option. Also, there is some good news on that front. I've read about a parasitic wasp that's has been released in parts of Canada. It lays eggs inside the beetle's larva. Hopefully that wasp becomes quite widespread over the next few years and eradicates that scarlet lily beetle once and for all. Places where it has been released, that beetle is much less. There's much less incidence of it being seen. So if you're in a cold climate and you want a lily that's elegant, low maintenance, and built for zone 3, plant Martagons. Give them shade at their feet, rich soil, patience. They'll reward you for decades. Thanks so much for watching today. I do appreciate each and every view I get. I hope you found it informative, and if you did, hit that like button, maybe a hype, and if you haven't yet subscribed, tap that button too. I hope you're doing well. See you soon.